I'm live. I'm continuing to read Out of Many Lifetimes. It's a collaboration of Joan Marshall Grant and Dennis Kelsey, her husband then. She passed away in 1989. She wrote a lot of books about her far memories, 7 books, and this here is largely about hypnotizing the patients, and her husband Dennis had a different way of working as she had. I'm here in chapter 5, and it is entitled Cultivating, the Cultivation of the Senses. I've already read, and I'll continue reading herewith. She's talking about a patient they had who was a little bit anxious, actually. Joan was a little bit anxious because the children who stayed in the house, I think there was 9 of them, they had a lot of visitors, bathed naked. And she said she thought of first of telling everyone to wear a swimming suit, but she discarded the idea because it would have caused the children to regard him as an oddity, the visitor. He looked a little startled when the younger ones dropped their clothes on the bank and plunged into the water. I had taught them all to be properly dressed for tea. When the older ones did the same, he ran back to the house, but only to fetch his cine camera. He expended 3 reels of films as they dived from the branches of an oak tree, swam out to collect water lilies, raced through the meadows. "It is like Eden," he exclaimed ecstatically. "What a wonderful lesson it will be for my congregation. I shall tell the narrow-minded members that it is they who are the serpents." Fortunately, as he had told me in many letters, his congregation responded very warmly, and he showed me his film so often that he had had to have several new prints of it made. Even children who had been constantly told, "Don't touch, you'll get dirty," or "Don't touch, you'll break it," soon learned to feel an object instead of merely looking at it, to feel an object instead of merely looking at it. With very little practice, they could identify 30 or more species of leaves with their eyes shut, and became alive to the subtleties of texture possessed by many different kinds of wool and stone and fabric. An interesting sidelight was that as they began to see with their hands, they began to take much better care of them. 2 confirmed nail-biters spontaneously cured themselves of this unattractive habit because they found it interfered with the pleasure of feeling with their fingertips. Their manual dexterity increased to a remarkable degree, and not only in such obvious ways as being able to knock in a nail without hitting their thumbs or repairing their bicycles efficiently, but in the benign direction in which they employed their reawakened talents. Very soon I could trust any of them to take a tick from a dog's ear without leaving the head embedded, or to remove burrs from a girl's hair without making her wince. An expertise never achieved by any of my nannies. It was my daughter who taught me the best way of removing grit from an eye. A child had fallen flat on his face in the sand of the riverbank, and I was licking the corner of a handkerchief and twisting it into a point as a preliminary to removing the debris, when Gillian exclaimed, "Oh, Joan, don't be so silly. Lick it out. Your tongue is much softer than a handkerchief," which of course it is, and also very much more effective. Not long ago I recalled a happy and acceptable life as a Chinese concubine. From early childhood she was taught how to increase the flexibility of her hands and the sensitivity of her fingertips. By the time she was 13, the difference between the texture of one type of flower petal and another, and even the texture of different species of plums, was as obvious to her as the difference between linen and tweed would be to most people. To protect her fingertips when off duty, she wore artificial nails, their length and the metal from which they were made being a symbol of her excellence in the art of love, just as the height of a chef's bonnet is a symbol of his place in the hierarchy of the artists in cooking. She lived a couple of thousand years ago, and as the Chinese also forget that love in all its aspects is the greatest of the arts, the original significance of the finger guards was forgotten, and Chinese women grew non-retractable claws as a status symbol. I believe that the cultivation of the senses is of vital importance, because they must either develop or diminish. They cannot remain static. The senses can remain acute and fully effective even in extreme old age, but only in individuals who have put them to full use. Such annoyance as being hard of hearing or myopic are not, as often presumed, natural handicaps of the elderly. They are often the result of nothing more nor less than sensory laziness. If this laziness continues too long, then the supraphysical can become seriously depleted in this particular respect, and in a subsequent incarnation the individual may find himself in a body which reflects these deficiencies, and may even be born blind or deaf. There are, of course, other causes of these disabilities, but I'm convinced that by far the most common one is a sense which has been neglected until it has atrophied. Among the benefits which would accrue from a widespread cultivation of the senses would be a marked reduction in the deaths which are caused by the slow suffocation of boredom. The number self-doomed to die of this malady can be seen in every restaurant and every resort among every plot of tourists. Yet the sad state of the bored and boring is totally unnecessary at any age. For the truly perceptive are never dull, and pleasure, not patience, is their criterion of companionship. There would also be a sharp drop in the incidence of sexual crime and in the promiscuity which results from neither of the players having been able to suggest anything else to do. For when a body has lost the use of one of its senses, the energy, deprived of its normal outlet, will flow into the others, which is why the blind usually develop an increased acuity of hearing and touch. So if, in successive incarnations, an individual has made little use of his sensory awareness, due perhaps to conditioning in a puritanical environment, the supraphysical may have become so adept that instead of diving its energies appropriately, it allows the major portion of them to be concentrated into the genitals. This target being chosen because the reproductive urge has existed since our earliest animal incarnations, and therefore is so deeply ingrained in our memories that it is the last instinct to be abandoned. Because so many psychiatric patients were born still, suffering from the consequences of their delusion that merit could be acquired by bullying their bodies, it is not surprising that a psychiatric theory which discounts reincarnation presumes that it is normal for infants to be obsessed with their sexual drive. But though such sad little savages are likely to arrive in increased numbers, unless the present generation adopts a more sane sensory ethic, they will still only be terrifying examples of how a personality can become crippled by false concepts as factually as a fetus can be crippled by thalidomide. The least we can do for our children is to try to ensure that they learn more closely to resemble the natural condition of man. Then the term human nature will no longer be used as an excuse for behavior which is unnatural because it is very far from benign. Oh, that was the end of chapter 5. The chapter 6 is a reincarnation and psychotherapy, and that chapter is written by Dennis Kelsey, and I'll read that in a separate reading. Have a lovely, Wednesday, the 11th of September 2024.